Good morning on this Sunday, October 31st, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. A happy Halloween. Election Day is almost here. We take a look at turnout numbers for early voters. Also, Governor Kemp versus former Senator David Perdue. Could it be? And Herschel Walker gets the okay from high-ranking Republicans in Washington. Phil, Theron, and Bobby are all here. Brian Robinson is filling in for Martha. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Election Day is 2 days away, but early voting wrapped up. And taking a look at the Atlanta municipal numbers, well, turnout is just dismal. At last check, less than 30,000 out of 400,000 registered voters in the city of Atlanta. Brian, 4 years ago, about 100,000 people voted in the city election. Still not great, but what do you expect on Tuesday?
Well, generally, early voting is a pretty good indication of what's going to happen on Election Day as far as overall turnout. So we are looking at abysmal turnout overall. And Lori, I'm fairly shocked by it because rarely has there been so much at stake for the city of Atlanta with so many hot button issues at once. These are the things that excite voters, or at least anger voters, things that get you to the polls. So I am a bit surprised, particularly with the Buckhead City movement underway, with crime being a motivating issue for voters. And, you know, my takeaway from this, Lori, is if it remains this low turnout that we expect, you got to think that's a benefit to Kasim Reed going into Election Day, who has been trailing Felicia Moore in some of the later polls because he's got so much more money. Is going to have a turnout operation. He's going to be able to afford a turnout operation. That's very important in a low turnout election.
Good points, Bobby. I do want to ask you, what do you make of these numbers, and do these low numbers hurt or help the front runners, and do they help Kasim Reed like Brian thinks?
Well, I actually agree with Brian on that. I actually think that he's dead on. In a tiny turnout election, it's who can get people out to the polls. Well, how do you get people out to the polls? You pay people to make sure the folks are out knocking on doors and getting your folks out to vote. And in Kasim's former Mayor Reed's case, he's going to know who his voters are, and he's going to go know where to turn them out. For some of these other folks, they haven't necessarily run in a mayor's race, and they're finding their voters and finding their footing right now. So I do think that that does benefit him. I do think it's interesting that these numbers are so low, and it seems like this is happening across the country too, not just here in Atlanta. So I'm curious to see how this all shakes out, if there's some sort of big turnout on Election Day from a COVID fatigue factor. I don't know what to make of this.
Yeah, we'll see if we go back to the olden days where turnout was pretty big on the actual Election Day. Phil, Fulton County Sheriff Pat Labatt weighed in on the race. To the surprise of some, he endorsed Mayor Kasim Reed, the former mayor, saying he's the only candidate that reached out to him with a plan to cut down on violent crime. What do you think of this endorsement? Were you surprised?
Well, shame on the other candidates for not going to the sheriff and brainstorming with him and outlining their plans. That was a mistake by all the other candidates. So I can understand it. I think, though, that knowing Sheriff Labatt, he would work with anybody who's elected mayor. So I don't think that endorsement is that big a deal. In fact, we were talking, I take a little different take. We were talking about the undecided vote. Yes, these are low turnouts. I agree that all the candidates are fighting apathy. A lot of people, regardless of their politics, are just sick of nothing being done at the local level or the state level even. But I think we talk about the undecideds. I think if people are undecided at this point, I don't know if they're going to vote. And so that could hurt Kasim Reed, because we've talked on this program over the last few weeks that maybe the undecideds will break to whoever the candidates are. But I just don't see it. And the pollsters tend to say that if you're undecided on Election Day, you may not vote.
Absolutely. Experience tells us that. If you're undecided, you're not going to decide all of a sudden at the last minute. And Theron, I want to get your take on these low numbers, but also the National NAACP weighed in after a scathing letter by the Atlanta NAACP President Richard Rose criticizing former Mayor Reed. Rose saying he should have written his comments as a private citizen and not representing the NAACP. This turned into a lot of drama.
Well, let's start with the low turnout first. I kind of agree and disagree with my fellow panelists. I do agree that the numbers should be higher. I mean, we were expecting, Lori, as you mentioned, for it to be over 100,000 people that will vote in this race, because we roughly have about 428,000 registered voters. And we have 80 8,000 more registered voters in 2021 than we had in 2017. But I do believe that it doesn't necessarily just benefit Kasim Reed. I think it benefits Felicia Moore too, because every poll that we've seen publicly, privately, Felicia Moore has always been in the first and maybe sometimes second spot. And so I think that she will also be a beneficiary of a low turnout. But I will also say this. I think that to Phil's point about the undecideds either staying at home or they not impressed with the top two candidates, don't be surprised if there's a name that we haven't mentioned, maybe Sharon Gay or Andre Dickens, who will surprise us all on Election Day. And keep in mind, there's still Friday voting, which I think we won't get those numbers until Sunday to see how the early vote goes. And then as far as the NAACP letter, I want to say this. I think, Richard Rose has done a phenomenal job of leading the Atlanta NAACP. He definitely came out and said that he should have probably expressed those comments as a private citizen. He well documented 7 reasons why Kasim Reed, from his thoughts, shouldn't be the next mayor. But I think too, what Brian said earlier to me this week, the damage is already done, because I think ultimately people are talking about how unprecedented it is for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People to not back a African-American candidate who's a lifetime member of the NAACP, and that being Kasim Reed. And so this is definitely something that everyone has been talking about across the city.
It is a talker. And, there's a lot going on this week. There are lots of other races to watch across Metro Atlanta, mayoral contests in Sandy Springs, Johns Creek, Tucker, Stone Mountain, just to name a few. Phil, which ones will you be watching?
Well, since I live in Sandy Springs, I'll definitely be watching Mayor Rusty Paul hopefully being reelected. It's amazing how radical the Democrat is that's opposing him. These are all across the state. They're supposed to be nonpartisan mayoral and council races, but Dante Carter in Sandy Springs actually has talked against the police. He said last December 15th in a podcast that blue lives don't matter. He said that the police force was built on the slavery. He wiped some of this off his website when he realized that wasn't going over, even with independents and some Democrats. I'll be watching Johns Creek. I'll be watching Roswell. The Democrats are making a big effort to go door to door and to get votes out. They want to try to capture those local mayoral and council seats.
Theron, over to you on this issue, because Democrats have made strides in some of these areas, especially in North Fulton. Although these are nonpartisan races, do Democrats have a chance at some of these municipal elections like mayor of Sandy Springs, where Dante Carter is trying to oust the incumbent Rusty Paul?
Yeah, Dante Carter definitely is a energetic candidate and is doing his best to try to, get some attention about his candidacy. But I think ultimately Mayor Rusty Paul is going to pull that race out. I know Mayor Paul personally, and talking to a lot of voters who live in Sandy Springs, definitely feel like he's done a good job and he deserves to be reelected. But I think to your point, Lori, we've seen census numbers. We know that the majority of the cities in the metropolitan area are actually very, very much more diverse than they were 4 years ago. And so I think Democrats who are in sort of these traditionally red areas have got to build sort of a coalition of voters that are nonpartisan to not only try to get Democrats out to vote for them, but maybe pick off a few moderate Republicans that might like, things about their candidacy.
Brian, what do you anticipate Tuesday in some of these other races?
Well, here's what I'm watching, Lori, is you're seeing the candidates in these nonpartisan races take very partisan stances, and this is something fairly new. And so we're going to see in Tucker, Johns Creek, in Sandy Springs, the potency of the anti-crime message that the Republican candidates and that the Republican Party is doing for those candidates, talking about the crime that's happening in Atlanta and how we can't let that come into our community. And we'll also get a pretty good take based on the way this has been partisanized, the growth that Democrats have seen in some of these areas. Like John Creek not that long ago was solidly Republican, and now you're beginning to see those numbers soften. You saw a really close congressional race in North Fulton last cycle. So that's changing as those demographics change. But here's one thing I predict in these areas. The diversity that Theron is talking about, these are folks who move to these areas for a reason. They want safe communities and good schools. They are going to be open over time to the Republican messaging on zoning and police.
Bobby, about 20 seconds.
Yeah, I think a lot of college-educated folks are moving into these areas like Roswell and Johns Creek and Alpharetta and Sandy Springs that are coming from out of state because they come here for the quality of life, they come here for the good schools, they want to raise their family, and they don't come here necessarily with that traditional Republican mindset. Instead, a lot of them come from Democratic-leaning families or Democratic-leaning areas like Seattle or Los Angeles or Philadelphia, and they've come down here and they've planted roots. And I think this is the battlefield for the Democrats here in Georgia going forward. We have got to get these folks to turn out again. They turned out for both Senators Ossoff and Warnock, Lucy McBath, Carolyn Bordeaux, turned out for all these folks in the 2020 election. The big question is, can we get them back out to the polls in 2021 here for these municipal races, and then again in 2022 for the midterms? And that is going to tell the tale.
That is the big question. Well, coming up, could former Senator David Perdue jump into the governor's race? We'll discuss after the break.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Well, the rumors are still swirling, so I guess it's time to discuss the possibility of former Senator David Perdue jumping into the governor's race next year. This would be quite a matchup between him and Governor Brian Kemp. Phil, the AJC's Greg Bluestein cited sources that Perdue was gauging interest from supporters. Do you think that this could be a real possibility?
The answer is yes. I've been talking to some folks down in Mar-a-Lago where President Trump is. I've talked to some of the Republican consultants. David Perdue was at the state party dinner Thursday night where he was working the room. I ran into him and talked to him. I'm looking in the crystal ball. I think he'll announce for the May GOP gubernatorial primary. And I think that maybe a page could be taken from Glenn Youngkin, who's the Republican candidate for governor in Virginia, and how he's building a center-right coalition and really riding the backlash, I guess I should say, against Biden and the Democrats. I think there's a huge backlash going on here in Georgia against Biden and the Democrats. And so it's going to be a Republican primary. It could get nasty, but I think the unifying factor after May, whoever is governor, and I think it would be both their candidates are strong, obviously a governor, an incumbent governor, and then a former U.S. senator. But I think that the party would be unite on one thing, and the center would come with it, and that is against the radicalism of the Democrats.
Phil, I think nasty would be an understatement in a Republican primary battle between these two. Brian, you're in the know in the Republican circles. What are you hearing?
Well, there's been a definite change in the atmosphere in recent days. You know, we kept hearing all fall, talking to people who are in that Perdue world orbit, that he's consistently saying, I'm done with politics, I'm not going to do it. And we're also hearing, though, that President Trump is doing the hard sell, calling him every day. And, of course, Trump is coming into town this weekend. So there's a lot of things up in the air right now. And what we're seeing immediately is messaging from the Kemp team showing that it's going to be scorched earth all of the way. And, you know, look, Republicans do have the wind at their backs going into the general election next year. Phil is right. There is a backlash to Biden. There's a backlash to inflation and gas prices and this budget deal, the border crisis. All of that is playing in Republicans' favor. But they've got to be unified. My concern is a divisive primary could hurt our general election chances up and down the ballot when we are in really strong position. But, you know, we've been known to heal those wounds quickly before.
Bobby, you got your hand up. Bobby, can you hear me?
There we go. Sorry, I muted myself for a moment. Probably what Phil had his hand on the button or something. So Brian. Anyway, what I was going to say was leave it to Donald Trump to take what could be an opportunity year for Republicans and totally screw it up. If he draws David Perdue into this race and as a primary against Brian Kemp, first of all, you're going to have Stacey Abrams, whether she decides to run or not, sitting there just licking her chops and laughing. And secondly, you're going to have a absolute civil war within the party again over Donald Trump. And it's the one thing that could screw this up for Republicans here is if they insert Donald Trump back into this debate, and you'll get Democrats who want to turn out again, and you'll get Republicans who decide to stay home because the election will be, quote, stolen, even in the primary. If this gets us right back to the clown car. It's absolutely the worst case scenario for the Georgia GOP.
Theron, I really want to switch gears. I know y'all have your hands up, but I want to move on because it's still a rumor at this point, and I know we'll be talking about it in the future. But, you know, we knew that this was coming as soon as we knew the Braves were headed to the World Series. Governor Kemp Kemp had a message for Major League Baseball, which pulled the All-Star game out of Atlanta over Georgia's new voting law. Some said, you know what, keep the politics out of the game. But Theron, is that fair to say when Major League Baseball got political earlier?
Well, Major League Baseball got political, Lori, because the Republican-led legislature decided to pass a very controversial voting bill that restricts people's access to voting. And so it was not the Democrats' fault that the MLB was put in a very awkward situation for them to basically say, hey, we don't want to come to a state and play a all-star game where you basically are creating all this dissension amongst your constituents. And so ultimately, I've said this before, I think there's got to be something in the polling, or maybe Republicans know something that I don't know, to the fact that they want to embrace the Braves. But the truth of the matter is that the World Series, games that we're watching had nothing to do with the MLB pulling out, for the All-Star game. That was two separate things. And so I just asked the question, if the Braves had a bad season, we see these same Republicans out here sort of, trying to instill politics into a sports journey that we should really all be coming together to praise the Braves on, and not bringing up, old wounds from the past.
Brian, weigh in here. This is going to be an issue for Republicans because it does fire up their voters, and Governor Kemp took a shot at Stacey Abrams for, quote, stealing the All-Star game from hardworking Georgians. There's his tweet right there that you see on the screen.
That's right. Well, let's not forget that she said that she was against the boycott, but only after she was for the boycott. Yeah, she changed her mind once the political wind started changing. I think this is a great issue for Republicans, and that's why you've seen so many of them take to social media with videos and snarky messages this week, because they feel vindicated. This didn't go well for Major League Baseball when they did this. They thought rose petals would be thrown at their feet, and instead it was a PR disaster. And so now they tried to take an important event away from our city, and now we've got an even more important event by a magnitude of 1,000, because we've earned it and they can't take that away from us. And that's why you're seeing people crow. It's karma, it's justice, and let us enjoy the moment.
Bobby, is it karma, as Brian puts it?
I'm just going to say go Braves.
Keeping the politics out.
If this is one thing we can all unite on, neighbors are excited, friends are excited. I know we have Little League baseball players in our family, and the Little League baseball teams are excited. You got kids wearing Braves jerseys to school every day. This is what it's all about. This is America's pastime, and it's an exciting time to be in Atlanta, and we sure hope that they win. I
think we can all agree on that. I got a little one who plays Little League as well. Coming up, Republican U.S. Senate candidate Herschel Walker gets the approval of high-ranking Republicans in Washington. We'll discuss what that means next.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says he is happy to endorse Herschel Walker for U.S. Senate. Same with Senator John Thune. Phil, these folks were hesitant to endorse Walker at first. While the endorsements are good for Walker, it's what follows them, which I think is even more important, and I'm talking about all the money that could be pouring into this race.
You're making a good point about the money, Lori, and I think that just like both parties have to do with their major candidates when they run statewide or nationwide, they have to get the PACs involved. And of course, Mitch McConnell, the Senate Minority Leader, has a PAC. The Trump PACs will be weighing in. Other PACs will be weighing in. Herschel Walker had a great fundraising month in September. His polling is fantastic right now. Yes, things are still getting started, but Republicans obviously want to win back that U.S. Senate seat. And while there's some fine candidates running in the U.S. Senate Republican primary, right now Walker is the man to watch.
What do you think about these endorsements happening now, Theron?
I mean, look, I think that Herschel Walker, as you pointed out, Lori, was sort of not welcome with open arms by most of the GOP at first, and particularly the national folks. But I think what you're seeing now is that he has the support of former President Donald Trump. And it's really, quite frankly, amazing to me that, at a time where you really listen to what Herschel Walker is trying to say, he's actually trying to present sort of a more independent, moderate Republican message, because if he's the nominee, he knows that he's got to figure out how to motivate the independents. But ultimately, ultimately, for Mitch McConnell to inject himself in a primary in Georgia, I agree with you and Phil, Lori, that I think that it's going to generate a lot of money. It's going to generate a lot of momentum for his campaign. But ultimately, I think it's about winning in November. And I'm very confident that with the money that Senator Warnock has been able to raise, how he's out here fighting for Medicaid expansion and a host of other issues that Georgians really care about, he'll be ready for the test.
Brian, what do these endorsements mean for the other Republican candidates in the race trying to unseat Senator Warnock?
Well, I think the important thing here to watch is because voters don't care that much about Washington endorsements. I think where this is significant is, how does it impact like money coming out of D.C.? And that's going to be the way that in insider circles, Walker will talk about this.
Well, on Thursday, the state elections board made changes to the way Georgians apply for absentee ballots. They have to print out forms and manually sign them. Bobby, critics said that makes it really hard for people who don't have access to printers. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would agree with that. I think it's interesting that this is once again the issues that are being focused on by the Republican legislature, the Secretary of State. I just wish they could take a moment, breathe some fresh air, and decide, let's make this as easy to vote as we can in a legal matter. And apparently that's just never going to be the case with this crew.
Phil?
Well, I think it was a very necessary reform that the Republicans did to have this. In my neck of the woods, you see Democratic activists with actually portable printers going around to apartment complexes and elsewhere. And so I think a voter ought to take a little responsibility. What's wrong with signing the application form? And I think if we're all worried about fraud, especially in Fulton County, it was a good reform that the legislature did.
Well, lots more to come on that issue. Theron, the special session for redistricting starts this week, and Democrats released their maps, which really don't have much of a chance of getting approved. But all eyes we know are on the 6th and 7th congressional districts.
Yeah, I think now this is the second set of maps that we've seen. The Senate Republicans released a map. The Democrats released a map. I'm waiting to see what the House Republicans caucus will release. So I think we're a long way away, Lori, as you pointed out, from settling on a final map. And even when that map is voted on, it's still going to be challenged in the courts. And so ultimately, you're about to see a robust conversation about gerrymandering and redistricting and redrawing lines, not only just for our two congressional seats 6 and 7, but a lot of state senators and state representatives who are in the metro area and the rural area are going to probably be put in districts that they don't currently represent, or they're going to actually probably have to decide whether or not they want to run for that seat or another seat, because we got to figure out how to spread it out equally.
Brian, last word on this, because we are watching the maps, and especially the 6th and 7th congressionals, and what happens to the folks in those districts.
Yeah, and the maps that we've seen so far, the drafts, these are far from finished products, do a lot to maintain the status quo in Georgia. Now, there's obviously got to be some change because the population has changed. And yes, there is going to be some politics because there's always politics. And so what you're going to see, what it looks like, is that the 6th district, which right now is East Cobb, North Fulton, and North DeKalb, you're going to see that moved out of DeKalb almost certainly, and then up further north into more Republican-friendly areas. And one thing that they've got to be careful of is they don't want to just create a Republican district there for the next 2 or 3 cycles. They want one for the next 10 years.
All right, everybody, we'll leave it there. Thank you. Sorry, Bobby, we'll get to you next time. Coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Well, we want to first start off by saying that our thoughts and prayers are with our colleagues over at WSB-TV, where I spent 19 years of my life. As many of you know, we tape the show on Friday mornings. We just found out about the passing of Jovita Moore. She was such a strong leader in that newsroom, a strong mom, and a strong daughter. So it's quite a loss for Atlanta. So I'm just going to take it over to Theron.
Well, Lori, this is heartbreaking, and definitely want to add my condolences to the family of Jovita Moore. I mean, Atlanta will never be the same without her. She was just a phenomenal woman who we all loved, and I've had the opportunity to not only become her friend, but she's interviewed me over the years, and we're definitely going to miss her. And my condolences again go out to her family. I want to also take a moment to try to do my best to perk up here. It was hard to announce some winners. The first winner is going to be Michelle Taylor, who was announced this week by President Biden to be a United States ambassador for United Nations Human Council. And so Michelle's a dear friend and a staunch Biden supporter for many, many decades. Want to congratulate her.
I'm glad you mentioned that because it was on my list. We just didn't have time to get to that. Phil, over to you.
Well, yes, again, condolences to the Moore family. And on a lighter note, of course, we hope the Braves are going to be the winner on Sunday. So also, I've got to have a political note here as the losers. Joe Biden is the loser. Nancy Pelosi is a lame duck speaker of the House of Representatives. And I think that the Republicans have a great shot at getting back both houses of Congress.
Bobby, I got about a minute left. Over to you.
Yeah, echoing the thoughts for the Moore family, and to take a moment and a reminder that we as a human race are battling this terrible disease called cancer, and to remember to continue to fund these efforts and applaud the folks who are out there on the front lines doing the research and doing the work. I also want to make Michelle Taylor a winner, who's a fabulous skier, and will enjoy her time in Geneva as she serves as our U.S. ambassador out there on the council.
All right, Brian, I got about 30 seconds.
I love Jovita too. She always said to me and Theron when we did interviews with her, you know, always spinning. Hashtag always spinning was what she always said. And we are going to miss our friend. I want to make my winner all of the businesses around Truist Park who are going to make up for the money that they lost during the All-Star game earlier this year.
All right, we'll leave it there, everybody. Thank you, and thank you for those kind words about Jovita. Thank you all for watching. Go Braves, and we will see you next week.